own biggest fan, actually. Thank you for the 1 year. Enjoying the badge. Evolution of the tanks. What's a real tank?
Throughout history, men have designed armored vehicles to be used against their enemies on the battlefield. While the first vehicles with the name tank have their roots going back to the World War I, the idea and the concept of the tank goes back all the way to the Middle Ages, where carriages were converted to serve as breakthrough weapons or to transport valuable goods. Some of these carriages would be classed as siege units instead of tanks. That's because of the elements that makes a tank, like its propulsion and firepower, were not yet sufficient in those days. Believe it or not, a V12 twin-turbo diesel engine generating 1,500 horsepower was not a thing yet in the 1500s. For example, this carriage would have had a combined horsepower supply of 1. Sad times. Many different designs were transformed into weird-looking shapes, including a design from Leonardo da Vinci, resembling more of a movable teepee tent than an actual tank. With a dozen cannons covering all sides, this was less of a tank, more so a movie set piece for Pirates of the Caribbean. More so, an effective reloadable cannon was also not yet invented, with armies mostly using dismountable cannons to be used as artillery. Fast forward a few hundred years, messing around with horses and shitty wooden cars, the first serious design of something resembling a tank came in the year 1915. A British Army colonel named Ernest Swinton and William Hankey championed the idea of an armoured vehicle, with conveyor belt-like tracks over its wheels that break through enemy lines and traverse difficult territory. To keep the project secret from enemies, production workers were reportedly told the vehicles they were building would be used to carry water on the battlefield. So, the shipment containers were labelled with the name Tank. I guess it is getting a bit obvious now where the name Tank came from. You're welcome. The first tank prototype was getting the name Little Willie. Yes, a very well-suited name that just shouts out fear, chaos, and destruction. Little Willie was slow, broke down easily, and was bad in crossing trenches, which was a pretty fundamental issue in World War I. By 1916, Little Willie was followed by Big Willie, which had similar issues. Nevertheless, people saw its potential, so further improvements were made on the design of the Big Willie Mark I. This resulted in the first successful large-scale tank maneuver during the war, with 400 tanks capturing 8,000 German troops and more than 100 field guns. With this successful win, the story of the arms race had begun.
What I care about
is
is
a new tank to counter these threats. The German A7V Sturm Panzerwagen, yes indeed a better name
that's
than
right.
Little Willie,
A title clarification.
Although the vehicle set a performance record, the Germans failed in getting a high production number that would make a significant difference.
Actually drop your pants and let me suck that dick of yours.
During World War I and after, many weird tank designs followed, with the Russian Tsar tank basically a giant reversed wheelchair, which was almost impossible not to spot by enemy units. Also, the enormous wheels would have made it very difficult to shoot any of the guns on targets in front of you. You know, that place where the enemy is 99% of the time? The 1917 American-built track-layer Bester wasn't a beauty either. A toppled-over rowing boat with a turret was another weird, faulty design. The vehicle was only used for training maneuvers, and its legacy was short-lived, with the vehicle ending up being used to lead parades being covered in posters, probably displaying the text, "How not to build your tank." With the outbreak of World War II, the most prominent tank-producing nations being the UK, Russia, Italy, Japan, Germany, and the US joining later in the war, all had very different approaches on their tank designs. The Italian and Japanese tanks were among the worst of the bunch. If you don't agree, yes, you can leave a comment down below. And no, we will of course not read it. Especially during the closing stages of the war. Japanese and Italian under-armored and under-gunned tanks stood no chance to the overwhelming numbers of Allied tanks.
Hell yeah!
The Germans did a better job engineering their tanks, but as mentioned earlier in this video, had problems over-engineering their tanks and could not keep up with the mass production. Simpler tanks like the M4 Sherman and the Russian T-34 tank. The tank producing capabilities of the US...
Alright, thank you very much for the information.